Final messages before people go missing can act as a trigger or a call for help, letting the recipient know something is wrong. In other cases, they can be reminders that sometimes there's no warning before people go missing. These are 5 last messages before people vanished. Number 5. Jayden Pinot Thompson was traveling to Cairns with a friend to welcome in the new year when he went missing on New Year's Eve in 2017. Jayden and his friend Lucas had traveled around 1,800 kilometers when they stopped at a service station at Charters Tower early in the morning. CCTV footage captured the two getting out of Lucas's car and heading into the store. They then continued on for a while, but got into an argument over money. Jayden, who had been driving, pulled over to the side of the road and got out. Lucas left him there, later claiming he needed to leave to get his car fixed, or else they would have both been stuck. Jayden hasn't been seen or heard from since, and his bank accounts haven't been accessed. It wasn't until 3 days later that Jayden was reported missing. However, it was the day before Jayden was last seen that his mother had grown concerned. She knew about the trip, but had been checking in with him since he left home. On December 30th, she called and texted multiple times to ask if he was okay, but the phone went straight to voicemail. Hours later, he sent her a one-word text and answered yes. While the CCTV from the service station appeared to show Jayden was at ease, there was a lot going on for the young man. According to Lucas, he'd been arguing with his father and told his friend that there was a warrant out for his arrest, though no warrant existed. The last messages sent from Jayden were sent to his cousin, who'd been waiting for him in Cairns. It had been sent from his friend's phone, but he identified himself as Pinot. He told his cousin on the 30th that his phone was broken and that the car had broken down, but he and Lucas were on their way. Jayden's mother feared these last messages weren't sent by her son. Some suspect Jayden may have disappeared to start a new life for himself. He had his wallet when he went missing, but didn't have his phone or any other personal belongings. This includes medication, which makes the possibility much less likely. Number 4. Based on text messages alone, the disappearance of Drake Kramer has a simple yet sad answer. Despite this, his family still have no answers about what happened to the 21-year-old on February 2nd, 2015. Drake seemed in good spirits when he left his home in Texas 4 days before his disappearance, and his parents assumed everything was fine. It was only a few days later, when they received ominous messages from him, that they realized there was something wrong. They were surprised to learn Drake had driven to the Grand Canyon, where on February 2nd, he sent messages telling his family he needed to be back with Mother Earth and set his soul free. Fearing the worst, his parents reported him missing and tried to retrace Drake's steps. It was later discovered Drake had first made a trip to California before arriving at the Bright Angel Lodge on the south rim of the Grand Canyon on February 1st. Drake was an experienced hiker, but rarely set off on hikes alone. He had traveled to the Grand Canyon National Park multiple times, often speaking to his friends about returning and staying there. He stayed one night before checking out the following day and heading towards the canyon, and it was the last time he was seen. Early search efforts focused on the beauty spots Drake was known to love. However, after a thorough search of the park, the only sign of Drake that could be found was his car, which had been abandoned at the lodge. Until any remains are found, Drake's parents remain optimistic. They don't believe he took his own life. A letter he'd written shortly before his disappearance spoke about how he cherished every soul that he had met and will meet in his lifetime. As well as the Grand Canyon itself, Drake's parents have visited the service stations he would have stopped at on his journey in hopes of finding more information. He remains classed as a missing person. Number 3. It had been an odd few years for Jeremy Burt, but he'd begun to get his private life back on track when he went missing in his ex-wife's car on February 11, 2007. Jeremy had married Kim George in 2002 and had a daughter not long after. Unfortunately, their relationship rapidly fell apart, and Jeremy had an affair with his divorce attorney, Jeannie Braun. Jeremy and Kim divorced but remained good friends as they shared responsibility in bringing up their daughter, Mackenzie. Meanwhile, Jeremy's relationship with Jeannie came to an end when she tried to get him to lie under oath. Jeremy recorded the conversations and testified against her in court. She was sentenced to a year in prison, in which time Jeremy tried to move on with his life. He'd started to rekindle his relationship with Kim, and she'd even moved back in with him, but she was away on a work trip when Jeremy disappeared. Leaving Mackenzie with his father, Jeremy told him he was going to meet up with a friend and left at 10:30 p.m. He never made it back to the friend's house. Instead, Kim received a series of text messages from him, telling her he was going to disappear, he was going to get a new address, and he was going to get a new life. It immediately raised Kim's suspicions, as she felt that they'd been in a good place and Jeremy wouldn't abandon his daughter. However, she couldn't report him missing as there was no sign of foul play and he wasn't at risk. She could report her car missing though, as it was in her car rather than his own that Jeremy had left. The car was found 3 months later, burned out and abandoned in the desert. Little evidence could be recovered, but it did make police start an investigation. Jeannie is many people's primary suspect, as she'd been released by the time Jeremy disappeared, but she insisted they hadn't spoken in months. Police say they believe the two were involved in Jeremy's disappearance, but no arrest had been made so far. Number 2. The final text messages sent by Brooklyn Farving only added to the disturbing nature of her disappearance. 18-year-old Brooke had been missing since the early hours of June 22, 2013. The night before her disappearance, she'd gone to a party with her sister and her cousin. Originally, she'd planned to stay the night with a female friend, but after a falling out, instead left with 2 men, one of which some sources named as Josh. The three went to visit some horses Josh looked after before dropping off the second man at his home. Brooke and Josh then returned to a home Josh owned. It was a foreclosed building with the electricity and water shut off. At about 4 a.m., Brooke called her sister to ask for a ride home. According to the sister, she didn't sound distressed. Unfortunately, her sister hadn't passed her driving test yet, and her cousin had been drinking, so she couldn't help. She then contacted her ex-boyfriend, who worked a late shift and would get off work at 7 a.m. Brooke agreed to wait until then, but at 4:26 a.m., the ex-boyfriend received a series of texts from Brooke asking him to hurry and telling him she was scared. An hour later, she sent another text which read, "Never mind," then told him she was going to another party. When the ex-boyfriend tried to get more information about this party, Brooke didn't respond. Her family realized something was wrong when she missed a family event the next day. They managed to track down Josh as the last person to have seen her, though they hadn't met the 20-year-old before this point. He told the family he left Brooke alone at the house that night, though the reason why differs between sources. Some say he was friends with her ex and didn't want things to be awkward between them, while others say that he had stayed a while but left to tend to his horses. When he came back at about 7 a.m., he found the house on fire. The couch where he had seen Brooke sleeping was ablaze and burned to the frame. There was also an intense burn on the floor beside it. Brooke's belongings were found on the porch outside the house, though her phone was missing. Many suspect Josh was behind her disappearance, and the couch fire was an attempt to cover up foul play, but no evidence had been found. Her family are still appealing for information. Number 1. Belgian backpacker Theo Hayes was last seen leaving a bar in Byron Bay in New South Wales, Australia at 11 p.m. on May 31, 2019. Theo had been in Australia since 2018, traveling on his gap year, and was due to return home to Belgium in early June. However, he failed to check out of the hostel where he was staying, leaving his belongings, including his passport, behind. The hostel alerted authorities 3 days after he was due to check out. On the same day, June 6th, his parents also contacted police, as they hadn't heard from him in over a week. A massive search began the following day, with volunteers and police searching land and water. It was discovered Theo had been asked to leave the bar as he was intoxicated. It was assumed he'd tried to make his way back to the hostel west of the bar. However, the final ping from Theo's phone was traced to Byron Cape in the complete opposite direction. The search effort focused the northern shore of the bay, where it was assumed he'd walked. Rock climbers even searched the cliffs for any sign of the 18-year-old, but no trace of him could be found. It wasn't until they had access to Theo's Google account that it was discovered they'd been looking in the wrong place. Tracing his location through his phone, it was discovered Theo had never been in the area that they had searched. Instead, he'd walked through a quiet residential area, then turned towards Byron Bay recreational grounds. It appeared as if he was lost and trying to find his way back to the hostel. During this time, he'd been messaging friends on Facebook. It didn't appear as if anything was wrong, as they discussed an upcoming U2 Australian tour. His final message was to his stepsister at around 12:55 a.m. The message read "Merci" with a kiss emoji. Once he reached the recreational grounds, something changed. He ran towards a small track in the bushland, again heading in the complete opposite direction of the hostel. He followed the track through the bushland to the beach and then to the east coast of Byron Bay and walked along the beach toward the lighthouse before his phone shut off. Now his family were certain someone else had been involved. It was easy to imagine he'd just gotten disoriented while intoxicated and walked in the wrong direction, but the track through the bushland was fairly hidden away and not something people stumbled across by accident. It was suggested that he'd been taken by someone who knew the area better than he did. So far, the only sign of Theo found was a gray cap matching the one he'd been wearing when he disappeared. DNA was found on this item of clothing, though it's not been revealed whether this was Theo's. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.